Okay, so let's begin. From this morning's session on the sacred now to the profane. But hopefully there'll be no profanities here at all. I thought that was a very useful discussion, and obviously these discussions can always have more time, and I hope at some stage we will be able to engender that time to be able to keep that conversation going and bring more and more critical perspectives. As Yahya started off the session by saying that this is an open conversation, and we really do see that. And for us, as institutions working and interfacing with civil society, the state, but also quite crucially with the Muslim community, for us it's really, I think, vital to be able to engender these sorts of conversations and debates, and also have connections back into the Muslim community so that the impact of this debate can be felt there. And I think the point that Sayyid Kube, who's had to leave us, mentioned about the disconnection between where current Muslim scholarship is and where this discussion is taking place is a very important point, and it's something that always reminds us of the challenge of the context that we're operating in. And I hope that these conversations will eventually filter and have their necessary impact. So this afternoon's session is about some of the more structural issues, I think. No less important, and perhaps, if anything, on a practical level, much more important. And I hope that we'll have, at least from the papers that we can see and the people that we've got, a very interesting and fruitful discussion. There are issues around culture and difference, there are issues around representation. Already we've touched upon the issue of establishment, and I know that Tariq previously, Ted in this paper touches upon this, Sundaro has also written about this, Rabbi Solomon before also mentioned this. So it seems to be an issue that is there, and something that, not something we can deal with, but it's something that constantly needs views and comments and conversation about. I'll ask Tariq to thank you.
Thank you, Dewa. Very pleased to be here and to be part of this workshop. I would like to think, which also wouldn't, that people have had a chance to look at the paper that was circulated, because, of course, time doesn't allow me to go through it all. I obviously can only summarize parts of it. I'll talk to some of it and I'll read out some of it, but the bits that I leave out probably will turn out to be important in justifying what I'm saying, or at least elaborating it a bit further. So if there's something you don't understand, I'd like to think it's not because it doesn't make sense in the paper, but because I'm not putting it across as well as I might, which is an encouragement to see or revisit the paper if you haven't already read it, and perhaps to see what I argue in a wider context of things that I've argued. For instance, a lot of what I'm drawing on here is to be found in my book on multiculturalism. The paper is in 4 sections, so basically let's say there are 4 sets of points I want to make, and I'll do it unevenly because some are a bit more important to me than others. Important to me in the sense that I feel, well, I've argued the other stuff somewhere else, but here I'm trying to take an argument further or introduce some new take on it. So the 4 sections I assume, I don't offer any kind of definition here, but I assume that secularism is going to be about some kind of separation, stroke distinction, stroke mutual autonomy between religion and politics. But how we interpret those terms, separation, distinction, mutual autonomy, so on, of course, is the important thing. So you can't put that in advance in a definition, because that could, set the terms for what can and can't follow later. So that in a way, a definition should follow at the end of the argument, not at the beginning of it. Not that I offer a definition at the end either, because work's in progress. But I do want to say something about in what ways we should and shouldn't understand separation when we say, oh, secularism is about the separation of religion and politics, or religion and the state. The second thing that I say something about is about what I take to be the character of secularism in Britain, in fact, in Western Europe in general, with the exception of France, only the partial exception of France. And then thirdly, I say something about multicultural equality and the public character of identity claims in a multicultural polity. And then lastly, I consider why the state might be interested in religion, because there can be a lot of different reasons. We shouldn't assume that there's only one set of reasons, and these reasons can be quite distinct from each other, and it's quite possible, I want to argue more than possible, that one could say one is a secularist, but support state interest in or intervention or regulation about religion for some reasons, but not for other reasons. So it's not a matter of all or nothing, because it all hangs on what we mean by separation. And I suggest that there are two meanings. I mean, more, but at least two meanings. One is that when we may say two things are separated when they're absolutely separate, when they have no connection with each other. And that is how a lot of people do understand secularism to be. They use the word separate to mean religion and politics, or religion and the state are absolutely separate. Very few reasoned positions are like that in terms of their conclusions, but a lot of public debate begins like that. When someone says, well, I'm a secularist and I believe this, they usually start like that. But they usually don't mean it, because you can reason with them and get all kinds of qualifications. And that's good, because to hold a complete separation view is both sociologically naive and in many ways conceptually inadequate. So what other meaning might separation have? Well, we say that two activities or two institutions or two things are separate, meaning they are distinct, but distinct doesn't mean that they don't have points of contact. Distinct doesn't mean that they don't have points of overlap. And that is a very good notion of separation. And I think that is exactly how most polities and institutional regimes that we call secular, especially within democratic countries, that's exactly how they're to be understood. Often not in terms of what you might call self-image or propaganda or discourse, but actually in practice, and sometimes also in terms of discursive reflexivity. But often, as I say, people sometimes use separation in one sense when they think they're stating a position, but actually that is only an opening gambit. That's not their final position, and very rarely, if ever, is the final position of any democratic arrangements. So it's quite possible to be a secularist, to believe that religious authority and political authority are distinct, that we should respect mutual autonomy, that there are good arguments, normative and pragmatic, for respecting the autonomy of religion and the autonomy of politics, but at the same time to believe that there are linkages and that the separation isn't absolute. And so in the paper I have a little kind of table